Well, hello. This is my first time doing a virtual convention and giving a speech without an audience. So, what I want you to do is if I say something funny, even if you're at home or in the kitchen or in the living room, clap and laugh a little bit so I feel kind of at ease like I'm in the room with you. Mike Dwyer called me a couple weeks ago to see if I'd be interested in doing this. And I was quite pleased to do it actually because we go back a long ways together. The North Dakota water people and Mike Dwyer and myself. I started writing for your magazine, I think probably in the 80s, late 80s or early 90s. And I got started because of Mike Dwyer. I'd written a legislative column at that time, and I guess my style, or maybe my lack of style, I had some humorous stuff in there once in a while, and it wasn't quite the dry column that a lot of legislators are writing, and Mike enjoyed it. And he encouraged me to begin writing a column, so I guess he deserves the credit or the blame, whichever you want to put on him, for the years that I've been writing for you. When I think back on my association with people from the water users, I think back to when I was in the legislature, probably in 1983, when I think it was the first bill to authorize the Southwest Water Pipeline. I remember sitting in a hearing room like the one I'm in, sitting here now giving this virtual speech, when people would come in from Southwest North Dakota with a jar of water that they'd got out of their well at home when they turned the tap on. They'd hold that jar up for our committee to look at, and it wouldn't be a jar of water that you could see through. It would look more like a jar of coffee. It was that dark. They would be wearing a white shirt or hold up a white shirt that they had washed that day to bring to wear to the Capitol. But it wouldn't be a white shirt. It would be a brown shirt. And because of people like your association, maybe your parents, your grandparents, or your neighbors worked hard for Southwest North Dakota, they have for the whole state. So now just about everybody in North Dakota, if they wanted to be hooked on a pipeline, could turn it on and have clean, clear water. And I think that's something very important. I think it's something everyone should have access to. And I want to thank you people that worked on that in your association for that. It was a wonderful thing that you've done and continue to do. Now, over the years, writing my column When the Well Runs Dry and my newspaper column Hat Tips, I've introduced you to, many of you, to my family, to my wife Shirley, who I often poked fun of and worked alongside. And over the years, Shirley and I have had many opportunities to sit down with some of you people and people all over the state, either on legislative meetings or a banquet or a rural electric annual meeting or something. We'd be sitting at a table of people, and somebody would finally realize that I was the guy that write the column. And they would look at Shirley when I introduced him, and they'd go, "You're that Shirley?" And it would kind of flabbergast her and bother her a little bit because we didn't know quite what they were expecting. I think over the years they've all had a picture of Shirley wearing Carhartt coveralls and handy work gloves, pretty much whatever she did. So I think when she cleaned up, and like I always said, she cleans up pretty good. When she gets cleaned up, it kind of surprised them. You know, I've always loved stories and telling stories and listening to stories of ranchers and ranch families, and I've loved to write stories about wild cows and pickups that were stuck in the mud or fallen in the river, and stories about hired men who, if they weren't in the wrong spot, they were running to beat hell to get to the wrong spot. Because we've all worked with people like that. I've enjoyed writing stories about horses and bucking horses and saddle horses and barrel racing horses and high school rodeo kids and football teams. And I've enjoyed introducing you to some of my relatives and some of the wise people that I've met in my life. And I count Shirley's Uncle Hugh, who is Uncle Hugh to pretty much everybody in our part of the country knew Uncle Hugh. And Shirley's dad, Grandpa Jack, and my Grandpa Herb, who were wise men, I think. And I think maybe when we were young, we didn't realize some of the wisdom that they were bestowing upon us, whether it was on purpose or by accident. And I hope you've enjoyed those stories over the years. And some of the stories, they're a little hard to write because you can't put the emphasis in the right spot when you're writing, when you can't get the swear word just right when you need it or something. And so there's always a few stories that I like to tell in person. I guess I'll relay a couple of those to you today to kind of lighten the mood a little bit. You know, I always talked about roundups on the Fort Berthold Reservation. We lived on the Figure 4 Ranch, and I'd grown up on a farm up by Berthold, North Dakota, farm and ranch. I always wanted to be a cowboy and be in cowboy country. And when we moved down between Watford City and Kildare along the Little Missouri, boy, I was in the middle of cowboy country there. And you'd go on roundups on the reservation and riding with the Murphys and the Conleys and the Chases and the Keels and some of the big outfits there that had been there, you know, that I'd read about them in history books. And it was fun. And when you'd go on a roundup, you know, you'd saddle your horse in the dark, and we didn't have a horse trailer those first years. You'd jump a horse and back the pickup or in a truck with a stock rack on it and haul out to the reservation early in the morning, leave before daylight and get home after dark and be horseback all day. And got to really love to do it. And it was just kind of an exciting thing. Because Grandpa Jack would line out the roundup. He would say, well, we're going to meet, you go over to Smith Camp and unload and go up by the Kennedy Hills and clean that flat off above John Yellowwolf's, and we'll gather and meet down on Hold Herd down on Squaw Creek. And just the names of the places, Eagle's Nest and Moccasin Creek and Squaw Creek and the beef, hills in the beef pasture, and Surveyor's Crossing and the Rock Crossing on Moccasin, and everybody knew those geographic spots. And you'd meet and hold herd and sort pairs all day long, and the guys were just masters at it. At those early years, nobody tagged, but you could pick out a pair. Oh, dang it, I should have shut that off. You'd watch those guys sort out pairs, and they could tell a cow from a calf, or tell her calf was which cow from a long ways away by the way they looked at each other, the little ballad that they gave. And it was fun to do. I think of some of the stories that we told. You'd sit and hold herd and get on the downwind side of the herd so maybe it wasn't as cold if it was in the fall. Sit there and tell stories, and maybe over lunch you'd have stories. The dinners were always brought out by either Uncle Hugh or somebody else. I remember one special dinner we had one time. We were down by the Rock Crossing on Moccasin, and this old ranch lady from near Watford City, and she was no battle axe. She was a tough old lady. And I had a good dog, a German Shepherd dog. It was a cow dog, which is kind of unusual. His name was King. I'd got him from the Bar U Ranch because he wanted to stay at our place, and I think I gave Bill Jorgensen $50 for him because he was a heck of a cow dog, and that was a lot of money, 50 years ago. And King was a heck of a dog, but he loved Grandpa Jack. And we'd go on roundup, he'd get behind Jack, because Jack would always take off first, and he'd ride a trot off on his horse Joey, and King would leave me and go with Grandpa Jack because he knew it was going to be kind of a fun circle, and they were going to go a long ways. And King and Jack had been together all morning. We're holding herd down on the creek and sorting pairs, and we quit for dinner, and a couple guys stay out and hold the herd. And I'm going through the line, King's alongside me, and this lady had made a great big pot of a really good stew. And King was standing alongside me, and I dished my plate up, and then I just took a small piece of meat off my plate and handed it to King, and this old lady tore into me and said she didn't cook all morning to feed some goddamn dog. And I'm going to use her words, and I apologize, but that's what she said. And I felt kind of sheepish about it and didn't say anything. And Grandpa Jack was behind me in the line, and he filled his plate and then walked over and set it down for the dog to eat right in front of that lady. And then he went, and he didn't eat a bite, Grandpa Jack. He just went and got on his horse, started trotting off, and the rest of us go, here we go. And you quick eat as fast as you could, and no time for a cup of coffee because we had to go keep up with Jack and go back to sorting pairs. he loved that dog, and that dog loved him. And that lady, she never cooked for a roundup again. That was the end game when Jack fed the king. Uncle Hugh was his brother, and he cooked a lot and brought a lot of stuff. And he was a real old cow man. They both were. One time, the vet had came out. Well, it was after the first of the year, and people are bangs vaccinating. It was a cold, windy day, and you had to vaccinate your replacement heifers and put a bangs tag in them, and everybody did it. And the vet had been working for Uncle Hugh and Jack for years, and it's a probably 75-mile trip from Dickinson up to the reservation to the 7-Up camp where they were giving shots. Well, this vet had been coming up there for years, and he had never charged mileage. Well, this was the first year he did that. So he presented Uncle Hugh with a bill that day when he got done working all these cattle, and he had put like $20 mileage on it or something. And that really upset Hugh. And Hugh didn't get upset very often, but that this guy had decided, besides charging for the work, he was going to charge him mileage. And Uncle Hugh thought he should just include that in his cost of the vaccinating. So they had a little argument about it, but Hugh reluctantly paid him. And it was getting towards the evening, and down a gravel road going west against the sun, and there's 3-4 pickups and trailers, or pickups and stock racks. The dust was kind of hanging in the air. There wasn't any wind. And the vet was kind of in the middle of this pack, and he didn't see this heifer of Murphy standing in the road. Here's a 1-bar heifer and standing in the road, and the vet runs into her with his pickup and knocks this heifer down in the ditch. And Hugh's right behind him. I think Hugh was riding with me, and we stopped. This heifer's down the ditch, and the vet walks down there, and Uncle Hugh and I walk down there, and this heifer gets up and kind of staggers off, headed to the south. And the vet watches her go, and he says, "I think she'll be all right," he said to Hugh. Hugh looks at him, and he said, "Well," he said, "if you think it did her any good, I'll be damn happy to pay you a little more." So he kind of got his comeuppance back to that vet. Uncle Hugh was a fun guy to work with, and he had, you could talk about anything with him. He'd read a whole set of encyclopedias, and he could recall stuff. Fun to travel with. I went to Washington, D.C. with him, and he had quite a way with words. I remember one time they're telling a story about him and Owen O'Neill, who was a cousin, I think, of Hugh and Jack. And they were riding on the reservation, and they were camping out at that time. As days got more modern, you would go home at night with a horse trailer or a pickup stock rack. But back in this day when this story occurred, you were camping out at night, and they were arguing over fire about, kind of a political argument, I guess you would say. They were talking about what people could charge for something. And Uncle Hugh always maintained that you could only charge, you were entitled to a fair profit. You couldn't overcharge. Everybody was entitled to a fair profit. But that was as much as you should charge, with just a fair profit. And Owen O'Neill was adamant that you could charge as much as the market would bear. If somebody would pay a lot, you were entitled to charge that if they needed it bad enough. Well, just happened they were riding on Sam's Creek, which is very rough. It's just up from the Lost Bridge and it's a deep old creek, and it's full of washouts and slides, and it's really hard to get around in there. And Owen was riding a horse, and he got alongside this slide and slid down into this washout. The ground gave way for his horse, and he ended up in this washout with the horse kind of on top of him. And he started hollering for help. The horse had him pinned to the ground. The horse couldn't get up. He was laying outside. He was in quite a predicament. Well, he started hollering, and Hugh could hear somebody hollering, and he tracked him down and found him down in that hole. And Owen's laying there kind of half under his horse and pinned, and he looks up at Uncle Hugh, and he said, "I didn't think anybody could hear me hollering from down in here." Hugh said, "You were hollering so loud they probably heard you had killed her." He said, "That's 25 miles away from there." said, they probably heard you hollering at killdeer. And Owen looked up from underneath that horse and he said, throw your rope on this horse here and pull him off me. Hugh said, well, he said, let me think about it. He said, what's it worth to you? So he was going to get a little dig in on him. So I thought that was always kind of a cute story that kind of settled the economics of the world on the debate on if you should charge a fair price or if you're entitled as much as you could. And I think at the end of the day, Owen agreed probably that just a fair price was enough. You know, many of my stories are getting a little old to me, and I'm sure to some of you they are too. And I've been meeting a deadline writing for your magazine and for newspapers for probably 30 years now, maybe more than that. It's getting a little hard to do. I don't do enough anymore. I don't go on roundups too much anymore or live on a different place. I go help a few people out and still ride a horse pretty much every week, and a lot of times in the spring and fall every day, but I don't get in wrecks like I used to. It's getting harder to meet a deadline. So I kind of hate to tell you this here at your convention, but I'm going to stop writing, I guess, for a while. And I've told Mike and your staff here at the North Dakota Water that I'm probably going to quit writing a weekly column or a monthly column. So some of you will probably miss it, and some will probably think, God, I'm glad we finally got rid of him. But if I think of something that amuses me or something happens on the ranch that I think will amuse you, I'm hoping I can still turn in an occasional column and talk them into writing it. Now, as I said at the beginning, your magazine and myself go back a long time, and we're going to be putting together a collection of some of mine and theirs and hopefully your favorite articles into a book form, and hopefully we'll have it out sometime in the next year. But so watch for that, and we'll keep you posted on it, and I'll probably get a column in once in a while. But I want you to enjoy your convention. I want to thank you for clean water. I want to thank you for enjoying my column. And I want to thank you for voting for Joe Biden. Shirley said I couldn't say that, but I thought I better throw it in anyway. Thank you. Enjoy your convention.